Welcome back to MFO, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you don't fish cypress trees, you don't have cypress trees in your lake, you're never going to go to a lake that has cypress trees, you don't have any desire to fish cypress trees, you should probably go to a different channel and watch something else, because we're going to talk about fishing cypress trees today. The reality is that cypress trees, bass spawn near cypress trees. Bass hang out near cypress trees because other bait fish, shad, bluegill, spawn near cypress trees. Cypress trees are a year-round cover and habitat for bass. They are just bass magnets. In fact, it was Jason Christie who earlier this year won an NPFL event throwing spinnerbaits around cypress trees. We're going to dissect how to fish around cypress trees, and I've got at least 5 things that my guess is you don't know about when it comes to throwing and fishing around cypress trees. Stick around, guys. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Mark Fisher Outdoors, everybody. I'm Mark Fisher. We're going to be talking about cypress trees today. And I've got a tip, by the way, guys. I've got several tips about how to throw and fish cypress trees, but I've got one of them that I guarantee you people do not talk about. I'm saving it for the end, but this is a tip that I don't think you have ever heard, and it is going to be one that helps you be more efficient when you're throwing the cypress trees. So, bass spawn around cypress trees. There's no doubt about that. But knowing where the bass spawn on a cypress tree is important. I think most of you kind of recognize the fact that on most cypress trees, there'll be a rounded edge and there'll be kind of a concave edge. And what I've found to be the case is that a majority of the time, if you've got a bass that's spawning using a cypress tree and using the knees underneath the water as cover for that spawning bed, a lot of times that bed is going to be in the curved portion of that cypress tree. That doesn't mean that that's the only place that I would fish, but it does give you some strategy in terms of that's probably the primary area that they're going to be hanging out. That or on those little, what I'm going to call the fins of that concave edge, that curved edge. So what I want to do is, if I'm going to throw, for example, if I'm going to skip a Cinco up underneath there, thinking that there's a bass spawning bed on a cypress tree, I'm going to absolutely make sure that I try and skip it into that concave center. And I'm also going to be aware of the fact that that's going to, a weedless wacky rig hook is going to be one, because it's going to get snagged on some of those knees. So you want to try and throw something that's not going to have an exposed hook if at all possible, or that there's a cover on that hook, a wire cover on that hook so that it doesn't get snagged. And it will happen. The other thing, though, as I talked about, is that other fish like to spawn against those trees too. Shad and bluegill spawn near cypress trees. And so in that situation, doing something like throwing a spinnerbait or a swim jig, even maybe a chatterbait, although chatterbait less than others. I really love throwing a spinnerbait, quite honestly. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm making multiple casts at multiple angles to that one cypress tree. Yeah, I want to throw past that concave portion, but I want to run it up the edge so that that spinnerbait comes out of nowhere, and a fish who might be in that concave portion all of a sudden just reacts to the appearance of that spinnerbait. Run it up along the other side in case he was facing the other way when I ran it on one side, now run it on the other. And then run it on the backside in case he's out there chasing shad or bluegill or whatever that are on the backside of it. So I'm going to throw to all different sides of that cypress tree. And again, my bait preference is going to be a spinnerbait. We're going to actually do an episode tomorrow where we talk specifically about spinnerbaits and things like that. So you want to make sure to stick around for that. As long as I'm doing a plug, I'm also going to do another plug. Guys, if you like this kind of content, please hit that subscribe button and subscribe to Mark Fisher Outdoors. I just slipped that in right in the middle here of talking about cypress trees. Let's keep going. The other factor of a cypress tree is even in the summer, cypress trees become perfect targets as bass habitat. That low canopy that you've got with those trees, it's like nature's dock. It's a shaded area where the water temps are 100% cooler underneath the shade of that cypress tree than they are 3 feet away where the sun is beating down on that water. So even though they're in shallow water, they still provide that respite from the sun. They provide that respite where a bass can hunker down next to the stump of the cypress tree, be in the shade, the water is cool, they're just sitting there waiting for a bait fish to come by where that opportunistic feeder that the bass is can come out and feed and then go right back in to the solitude of that cypress tree. So don't neglect throwing at those trees in the summertime as well, especially the big bushy ones. But when we talk about that, I want to talk about how to cast to them accurately. The one thing I will say is that you absolutely need to get good at pitching baits using a bait caster, and even if you're pitching baits like a spinner bait, which is an awkward bait to pitch in or to kind of skip or to do a kind of a roll cast, low cast along the water. But you need to get good at doing that. And it can be really awkward when you're getting, hung up in branches and things like that. But as best you can, you take a look at the tree itself and say, hey, I can hit this angle because the branches are higher. Now I'm going to go around to this and hit it that way. Boat positioning is very important. Now, guys, here is the tip that I talked about in the beginning of this video. Boat positioning is important, and I want you to take a look at this video. You notice that I'm making a cast here on that cypress tree, and the cast is actually probably about, I'm going to say 5 yards, 10 yards away from the tree. But notice what I'm doing now. I'm actually moving the boat to cut the distance of where that bait is going to run. And so that spinner bait, even though it landed 10 yards away from the tree, is now being retrieved right along the edge of that tree stump. So what I've done is made a cast. I'm basically triangulating my cast. I'm throwing to the far point of a triangle, and then I'm moving to the opposite part of the triangle and running that bait so that it goes right next to the tree. And you can do that very easily by just planning your cast. Okay, I'm making one pitch underneath or past it. Now I'm going to make a pitch that's out away from it. I'm going to move the boat so that that bait runs right up along next to it. That is a way to be much more effective with your casts and you're still running that bait near the tree, but you're not needing to make every cast right up underneath the cypress tree. And guys, the last thing I'll say about this is that not all cypress trees are created equal. You can fish a lot of trees and not get bit at all. But what I've found is that when you do get bit on a tree, really pick apart the ones in that area. Usually there's something about that area where if there's one, there's more. I've seen multiple fish on the same tree, and I've seen stretches of trees where on the next 5 or 10 trees, I've gotten bit on every other or every third tree going down the line. Once you find a place where those fish are, really make sure that you're hitting the rest of those trees in that area because they seem to congregate in certain areas. So that's my advice when it comes to throwing and fishing cypress trees. I will tell you that if cypress trees are in the body of water that I'm fishing, I'm always aware of the fact, it's kind of like docks. If it's got docks, that's definitely a pattern that you can go to see how well they're positioned on those cypress trees. Docks, cypress trees, if they're in the lake, make sure you pay attention to them. Guys, I appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you again tomorrow. We'll talk about spinnerbaits. We'll see you tomorrow on Mark Fisher Outdoors. Take care, everybody.